Okay, so I am here with Dan Goler, who is the man behind the DMT laser theory, which I covered in my recent video, which was titled DMT with Frikkin laser beams. And I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. And if you haven't seen that, I'd advise you go and watch that first because it'll set up a lot of the background for this discussion. But I'll just give a quick recap. So Dan's claim is that by using a specific type of laser projecting a certain pattern on a surface and then smoking DMT, that a certain phenomenon occurs, which is completely unique in the world of psychedelics, and that a kind of programming code language appears as a result of the interaction with the laser, and that the conclusion for this, from seeing this revealed code, is that reality is a simulation. And maybe if we've got time, we can get into what you think is behind that simulation. Now, in my video, I disagreed with this theory and pointed to several occurrences of similar subjective effects, and I offered an explanation for what I think is occurring, which is just a variation of common psychedelic effects. Dan saw that video and asked for the opportunity to respond, so here we are. And Dan, thanks for making the time. As I mentioned in my video, I do somewhat admire your enthusiasm for this kind of exploration, even if I do disagree with your conclusions on it. I just think there are a few probably different ways that we could come at this. But maybe if a good place to start with is if you could just introduce yourself and then maybe just go into what you think I got wrong, in my opinion, of the phenomenon that you're describing.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much, Rob. I'm honored to be here. I really did enjoy your video. It was very cleverly done and I laughed a lot, to be quite honest. So I guess a little bit background about myself. As we tried to record this conversation before, and I said it, but I'll repeat myself, obviously. I am, if we're looking for the connection between me engaging with these deep questions and my current, I guess, job, if you call it, as a director, producer, and editor of video content and film, it's somewhat not directly related. But I guess in the deeper connection of the seeking for ultimate questions or things like that, this is something that accompanied me my whole life. My grandfather was a physicist. I started getting into physics quite early. I didn't continue with that trajectory because of different things that happened in life. But the impulse to seek the deepest questions and answers is something that always drives me and animates me in every single thing that I do in my life. So I guess there's a connection there. And if you want, we can get a little deeper into the specifics of what caused me to even venture into this direction of investigation. But I think to be respectful of the time that we have, maybe let me just address the direct thing in the video. We can just get this out of the way and then we can have a discussion as we will. So the discovery is that, like you said, if you project a diffracted laser on a surface, what seems to be happening is that when you're on DMT, which now we know also works with a certain dosage of mushrooms and on ayahuasca, I'm sure there's probably other substances that opens that possibility as well, but these are the ones that I know work for sure. You see code writing in surfaces. Now, this is the uniqueness of the observation is how quote unquote objective it is, and we can of course discuss of what that might even mean in the context of being on a psychedelic drug. But it seems to be the same for every single person who sees it. And again, there's every single thing that I say, because we're basically on the cutting edge of understanding. Every single thing that I'm going to say, like the thing that I just said, opens numerous extra branch questions. Like, for example, what I just said, which is like, everybody sees the same thing. The first thing that comes up is like, how do you know? How do you know everybody sees the same thing? Do you have a way that reads everybody's mind? All of these are fair questions, but this is why my videos and the way that I view my videos and my work, they're more an opening of the discussion. This is not to, for a second, go back on what I believe is going on, because I am pretty convinced, and of course we can discuss why I'm so convinced that this is in fact the case. But the way that I view the project is it's more of an opening of a discussion, of a conversation of the flavor that you and I are having right now. So we can all together arrive at what we think is going on. So that's the way that I would frame it. And the way that the one thing that I feel that is being, there was not put enough emphasis on in the video, is the fact that there's a couple of parameters that are very necessary for the thing to work. One of them is that the laser has to be diffracted, so that's a must, which is something you didn't do in the video. You put a laser pointer, which I'm even mentioning in my videos that laser pointer would not work. Not sure why that is, but this is actually a big data point there. You can refract it through water, but it has to be diffracted first in order for it to be the refraction index of water seems to add something to how stable it is, but it does not work without the diffraction. So these things are very technical, but specifically to address your idea that you will outline yourself in a moment. Of why the laser, you think it's just it's one of the phenomena that we see on DMT on a regular basis when there's certain patterns that we observe, and it just kind of, for lack of a better term, spills into more of our visual field. The reason that it's not the same is because it is inside the surface, the thing that I'm talking about, and also it has a different kind of quality, which we can outline in a moment, because I want you to respond first.
Sure.
That all other psychedelic observations so far that I've seen, and I'm not placing myself on some kind of a pedestal of knowing what the truth is about psychedelics in general, but I have enough of an experience with these things, quite robust experience, to know what is the set of repertoire of archetypical experiences on DMT is, and this doesn't seem to fall into any of these bins. So I'll leave it here and I'll let you respond, then we can continue.
Okay, so I guess what we need to sort of try and pin down here is that you're saying that something happens that is completely unique to this process, and it does not happen anywhere else. And so I think as I acknowledged within the video that I did, I wasn't trying to recreate one for one the process. What I was trying to do was sort of elaborate that patterns can sort of become animated, and then once you're viewing these animated patterns through the lens of a psychedelic, then they can become something more. So there's a number of sort of examples I could use here. So this could be anything that's projected on any kind of screen. I think particularly when we're dealing with this kind of synesthesia of psychedelics, I don't even think it needs to be a projected pattern. Often these kind of programming languages can appear just purely as a visionary effect without any kind of sort of input. And they've also it's quite common for, these kind of shared visionary effects to appear based on, audio inputs. A very common sort of example of this would be that if you're in South America and you're in a shamanic setting, that as a shaman is singing, people very often report seeing the same kind of Ikaro patterns, these Shipibo patterns. So this is why I'm kind of coming at the angle that I don't think the laser is doing really anything at all. So I guess the kind of what I would put to you is like, how would you sort of state that something, particularly in the world of psychedelics where everything is kind of blended into one, all these inputs and modalities, vision is sound, sound is vision, is feelings, is history, is lineage, is all these things, then how would you sort of, you are literally saying that something completely unique is happening, that even though it's based upon vision, that it's actually not vision, and you're describing something that's kind of within an object, but it's not within an object. It's just something just absolutely unrepeatable except by this specific circumstance.
So I can't claim that I know that it's unrepeatable by any other circumstances. That's less of the claim that I'm making. But I am saying, however, and you got us into really the heart of the matter. Mm-hmm. And I think it is a very complex issue. The reason it is because it starts touching on our ontology itself. And really, that's where, if you want to go to the core of what this conversation is about, it would be about that. Within the frame of how we believe the world is at the moment, under the current scientific zeitgeist, there are a lot of things that make sense. And the cash value of all of these things is always around what is the functional essence of what it is that you think that is true. The way we define, unless you go like really into like deep philosophical tenets, really the way that we interact with what we call real, at least in the Western world, is always around, okay, what can I do with it, right? If the thing you think is part of what we call reality or consensus reality, then there has to be some correlation between that thing and a thing that I can over here, A, replicate because it's part of reality, so it's always there. B, do something with by understanding it, i.e. building some kind of a technology or, moving a thing before we couldn't move. There are a lot of invisible things that we now know are real. The most mundane things like magnetic fields and a lot of other things. But notice that in all of these cases, it always starts with the fact that you have senses that can touch on any side of the spectrum of these things. And then we use what we call our intellect to go through different processes. I don't want to say scientific process because there's a lot of other things involved, if you ask me. But we basically presuppose something, so we conjecture something, and then we test it and we see if it works. So, the whole, I don't know if you're familiar with David Deutsch's work, but that kind of like Karl Popper's tenets of like, okay, what works, what doesn't work, demarcation lines, all of that good stuff, right? So in that sense, I would fully agree with you that the full fleshed out saying, okay, we're on board, we get it, you're right, there's something here, will only come when we can utilize what I'm claiming to have found to either build something, do something we couldn't do before, or understand something about the world that isn't just part of somebody's impression, but something we can actually attach through either mathematics or through other means to the rest of what we understand about the world. And the reason it's so complicated to talk about this just with words is because it all rests on the experience of it. And this is something that currently, under how we view the world in the Western world, is not part of what we consider to be a viable way to decide anything about what we think is real, because we're so gullible, because we fool ourselves all the time. And the whole process of science is to basically, as Neil deGrasse Tyson says, to teach ourselves how not to fool ourselves, right? So to that, I would say that the reason that I'm convinced that what we're seeing is real is because of a certain property. Oh, so let me just tie in that point. So,
well, can I just pause you there, Dan? Because you said quite a lot, and I just want to try and so we just can deal with it in bite-sized chunks.
Please.
So, I mean, 2 points. I mean, I wouldn't disagree entirely with what you said, but again, we're talking about a very specific scenario. So I think that those conversations need to be had, and I think when we're dealing in the world of psychedelia, then that in itself creates the bridge to these conversations. So those conversations are being had anyway. And this is why I mentioned that the laser aspect is kind of a distraction, because it kind of puts the focus on a very kind of narrow, not to be sort of derogatory, but gadget, and says, hey, there's actually something here. And it does create this kind of illusion of something exotic is happening, which is actually a feature of the wider, sort of suite of psychedelia. So all that stuff is happening already, and all those conversations and those doors being opened, it's all happening already. And I think my concern is that by focusing on the gadget, it actually kind of takes away from that conversation. It makes it kind of kooky and it's like as though there's something sort of going on here, which particularly when you looked at in the wider sort of feels like psychonauts like myself and sort of several others I've spoken to, I kind of now you're thinking, what? This is just kind of everyday stuff. So there's that aspect, and then the other thing I just want to comment on is that I would disagree somewhat with this kind of notion that you put out that everything needs to have this kind of scientifically tethered cash value. Again, I think this kind of misses the point. And when we talk about things that are important to the human experience, as I said, I just had to go and interact with my children in the other room. You cannot put a cash value on my fatherhood, on my parenthood. You cannot put a cash value on the love that I feel towards my wife, my children. And that doesn't matter at all. It doesn't mean that society rejects that these things exist. It doesn't mean that we can't have wider conversations around them. And if somebody pulled out a love measuring laser, I would find them kind of slightly absurd. I think it doesn't really have any cash value at all. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we sort of again get too lost in the weeds.
No, and that's a fair course correction, but I think it also clarifies for me how you think, which is very helpful, because we actually align on all of this. And I think all of these things are, first of all, I agree with every single thing that you said. And I even share your concern with introducing things into, the world of psychonauts that actually make a lot of us seem to be more kooky than it needs to be. And I actually share the same sensitivity. And because, see, the thing here is that we have a time restraint. So I'm trying to address very large subjects as quick as I possibly can and try to flesh out the most important things. But really, you just voiced the exact center that I'm trying to point. And that is that everything you said, for example, you said it already exists within what we see as psychedelia, like in the psychedelic space. So really at the bottom of that is, do we think that the psychedelic space is just some kind of a very interesting possibility that the mind creates? Or is it something that exists independently of us and we interact with it? Which is really the bottom of this conversation. So I doing DMT for a long time before this kind of stuff started happening, I was completely in the physicalist perspective, like 100%. There was not an iota of me that considered, I was playing with some ideas in general about consciousness being somehow embedded in the fabric of reality and all that stuff. But what I meant, to your second point here, what I meant by the cash value to be in a technological way is not that I'm saying I think it should be that. I'm saying that most of the Western culture rests on the assumption that we follow the scientific method to things that really matter. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's how usually people kind of cash that out. They say, I can't know until I don't see something physical that happens. I'm in full agreement with you that human interaction is something that cannot be measured and is just as real as anything else in the universe. The moments that you share with your kids is a real thing. It happens in the universe, right? And it even drives physical things around itself. But these subjects are just too deep to nail down. And I feel it takes us away from the subject matter. So let me address your gadget point. If I would just be presenting that the laser is the full proof of the thing, which in retrospect later, I realized, obviously, this video was put out 2 years ago. You can't notice when you don't notice, right? So after people started reaching out to me, this is a point that was mirrored back to me a lot, which is why do you think that just because you see this code in the laser, it means we necessarily live in a simulation? And the honest answer is absolutely true. I don't. I realized later that actually this, for me personally, what happens in the laser was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. There was a lot of other data points that were occurring at the same time.
Okay, Dan, can I just, because I think we're going into something, and I definitely want to go there with you, but I think we need to sort of try and take this in chunks, because I think what we need to sort of pin down first is what is happening in the laser. So because you've kind of thrown out there that this is for you a way of tethering it into a way that you think is going to be recognizable to the Western sort of scientific zeitgeist. I don't know if that's in itself strictly true, because as things are evolving within the research space, we're seeing what's been dubbed the psychedelic renaissance. So this kind of that people are willing to explore these ideas as things happening within consciousness. I think that's happening. It's a bit long overdue, but it is kind of happening. So I think the zeitgeist is changing, and we shouldn't be too concerned about trying to sort of necessarily something needs to happen to stimulate that zeitgeist. It seems to be doing fairly well without the presence of a laser. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is, are you absolutely saying that what is happening here is not what happens anyway? Because it sounds kind of like you're saying something different.
Fine, anyway.
Anyway, within sort of within psychedelics, if you were either stimulated in some way, or that it's just possible, even just without any form of stimulation, that something purely unique is happening as a result of the interaction between this laser, the psychedelic in your head, or not in your head. Again, that's a whole different sort of conversation. or the psychedelic that you've consumed, let's put it that way, and yeah, is that this is some sort of reality-ripping event that only happens because of this combination of things?
I would say that it shows you a resolution of that space that all of a sudden makes it clear that that space is not subjective.
It's not subjective.
No.
Okay, so I think that's a slightly different claim than what's it comes across in your initial videos.
So you can tell me what you got directly from the video, and then we can. But I can also expand on why the specifics of the code, I think, actually point to something different than what we usually think about psychedelics.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think this is only myself who's having this kind of understanding, because certainly there's been some exchanges on Twitter, and there's been plenty of comments on my video. So this seems to be the wider understanding of what people think is happening. And what
is it specifically? So we can nail it down.
Yeah, something. The phrases that are often touted are something unique. This does not happen anywhere else. This is an entirely unique effect that only happens due to this combination of certain wavelength of laser plus certain amount of DMT equals reality breaks, and the code of the simulation comes pouring through.
Are you saying this is something that you've seen other people repeat, or are you saying that you saw me say that somewhere?
Well, I think that was my understanding from your video, so feel free to correct me if that's incorrect, but I've certainly seen that repeated throughout the comments on my video. And I think, I think because of the way that when you explain this, because you do jump through concepts very quickly, then it can sort of it actually makes it quite a difficult task to understand what is the absolute claim you're making, which is why I'm trying to pin it down now. So maybe in your own words, if you can just focus on that bite size.
Claim directly instead of us kind of guessing.
Sure, yeah.
Because maybe some people didn't even see the video. So okay, so my claim is, and so let me do this by also outlining what is so unique in the code, the way that I see it, and I'll tell you what the claim is directly. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so this is something that I started telling you last time we tried to record this. There's a property to things that I couldn't really, when I saw the code. So again, just to reiterate for people, you project a laser, you look at the surface, you smoke DMT, let's say. You all of a sudden see code running in the surface. The code, actually inconveniently, looks a lot like in the Matrix. It looks like Japanese katakana characters with a mixture of some Hebrew letters. One of the first things that jumps at you is the fact that even with things like the Alison Gray characters, which a lot of people on your channel will be familiar with, they are still pretty blocky in nature. They still belong to a family of things that when you smoke DMT and you see them, you can go, okay, I'm looking at some kind of a stochastic pattern. There's a laser. I'm on the most psychedelic drug known to man. I can totally see how my brain arranges this into something like that. When you see what you see, you have a comment, I feel?
Yeah, I just think it's worth pointing out here that I think with Alison's Gray things, she's not claiming it as a literal recreation of something.
No.
It's
but
just for the audience, just to make sure that it's it is intended to be an artistic representation of a unspeakable language, a secret language.
Sure,
so it's not. And I'd also say there are some similarities there, certainly to the Japanese writing you describe. A lot of the characters are similar, and I would agree with you. When I've seen these secret languages, they do have, it is this combination of looks kind of Hebrew, looks kind of Japanese, looks kind of computer language. These things blend together. But I'll stop there and let you continue.
No. Again, these reflections, I appreciate them because it helps us correct course pretty quickly. So yeah, so let me just finish the first thought first, and then we can discuss the details of it. So sure. I'm saying it to the effect that what we see is the Alison Gray language. I know she's not claiming that this is some kind of a language. And it's exactly what I'm saying, that if I would just be me as I am, and I would see that, which I never did before, actually, I would not think that it means something beyond me just kind of hallucinating something. There's something about the observation of what we see in the laser, about that particular code that appears, that seems to be different. And for a long time, I couldn't really place my finger on what is it that difference. So there's a few things. One of them is that it behaves like a thing that has its own spatial coordinates, in the sense that when you see certain visuals on psychedelics, including the stuff that you've outlined in the video you put out about my discovery, is that when you move your head or you move in relationship to the thing you're seeing in any other way, there seems to be a correlation between where you are and it. In other words, it responds to what you're doing. What you see in the laser doesn't do that. So it seems to be inside the surface, not on the surface, it's inside. It's almost like you're looking through a window, and it has the full parallax effect that a regular object would have, in that you will move your head around it and it would look like it's actually like staying in its own space. Then the other thing is that when you move the light, which is a big component there, you see that the light is just revealing it. It's not really it's not moving with the beam of light together. It actually remains where it is, and then the light just reveals it like a flashlight. Okay. And the last thing... Can
I just ask, so how would that be different to the kind of the scenario that I outlined with like a mobile phone in a dark room?
Well, so I'll tell you how, because the stuff you talk about actually goes to the core of the assumption behind it, which is this is mind-made. But I'm claiming that there's certain observations, like with the laser, that after you see them, it's almost like a reframing of what you thought was going on, and then everything else that you see around you after you see that takes a completely different shape. So even the thing with the phone will have a different connotation in your own head after you see what you see.
Sure. Yeah. But now we're talking about layers sort of on top. So I think we've got to separate out the. I mean, maybe we do. Maybe it's not possible to. But I think we've got to separate out the physicality of what is happening, because a large part of your claim is dependent upon certain physical materials being there. My sort of counterclaim would be that.
Sorry. What do you mean specifically?
A laser. A very specific kind of laser.
Well, so the diffraction matters. We discovered that a few frequencies work, but again, the reason that it's so hard to outline with words is because unless you see it for yourself, there's really not much I can. And this is now after speaking to thousands of people online. I realized that only after they see it, like full on, then they email me back or text me back and go, "Oh," and I go, "Yeah." So there's a thing there with like seeing it that I can't deliver with words because it's based on you actually observing it. Yeah.
I appreciate that, and I think this is kind of common of anything within the psychedelic experience. There are. It's almost impossible to explain something like any aspect of the DMT, even the lowest doses of DMT, to explain that to someone who's never been there is almost impossible. So I get that, and I'm not disputing at all that.
But in this case, there is kind of. So I do want to get to this point because it's important for me to outline, and then please respond. The last part I would say that I later realized how to call it, because apparently there's a term for this. In my first video, I came up with the terms epistemologically sound because I didn't know what to say about it, in the sense that the how you knowness of it is completely expressed by the observation itself. It's like you just like you're experiencing something without knowing how it happens, and you don't need any studies to prove to you that you're experiencing something. It's like the ultimate N of one that you don't need proof of. It has that property. And I later discovered a term in Anil Seth's book, Being You. He talked about a term that cognitive scientists and neuroscientists use, which is called objectness. And what it's used to describe is a certain rigidity of an object that exists in a regular three-dimensional space that the brain build a very large repertoire of correlations with. And so it's very hard to fake, almost impossible to fake. And an example that he uses to illustrate this is that people who suffer from synesthesia, they never confuse synesthetic colors with regular colors, because regular colors have certain interaction with ambient light that synesthetic colors don't. So the thing in the laser has this property. It has objectness. It has such rigidity in all the other aspects, in correlation with all the other aspects we use to describe regular physical objects. It looks exactly like that in the sense that it doesn't change itself according to what you seem to be doing. And when you have, I've now done this with 15 people in the room, before it was 5, the largest number, and you have everybody looking at the same thing, completely coherent because you smoke sub breakthrough doses, and you talk about it. And this is not people who committed to prove these things. A lot of skeptical people as well. And then you have people standing there going, "Oh my God!" And then they pointing to the thing, And they're like, do you see this? Yes, 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 I see this. There's this amazement in people's eyes that is a huge indicator for me that something else is here. Now, all of that being said, because I want to offer this olive branch here, all of that being said, if it in fact means that there's some kind of a possibility of light to interact with DMT in this particular way, so everybody sees the same thing, because I don't know, because our brains are just so similar on that level, so be it, no problem. I was never committed to first of all, the whole idea of the simulation was never something definitely I preferred or even liked, to be quite honest. This is something that was just, I couldn't ignore what I was seeing, but this connects to the previous point I was trying to make, which is that in retrospect, I understand that a lot of the other things that are happening that I can talk about if you want, with the combination of the laser that worked, because I didn't land on this by mistake. I kind of aimed at it. I was trying to figure out what would work, and then eventually it worked. And even then, I didn't think, oh, I discovered this thing. I thought, oh, I lost my mind, because it was, what I was seeing. And then only when I started showing people, and everybody started seeing the same thing, and only 2 years after that, I decided, okay, there's enough here. After trying to email a few scientists, obviously, it's a very difficult email to email. I don't even know how to start talking about this. Eventually, I was like, let me just put out a video, and the right people will, if they're interested, and if there's something really here, they will contact me. We'll talk about it, and that's essentially how I went about it. Only after 2 years of playing with this thing, after, I don't remember what the exact number was at the time, maybe a little bit over 100 people that all saw the same thing, including people with technical jobs. They're skeptical people, from architects to physicists to actually a couple of neuroscientists that saw this thing. Then I was like, okay, I think we need to talk about this. There's something here, and I needed to get to the attention of people that are much more deeply involved in this larger conversation that you're mentioning. That's when I put out the video.
Okay, well, but I mean, you think there is a kind of a very simple sort of principle at work. Like DMT is astonishing. So the fact if you get people together or and singly and give them DMT and tell them to look at something, they will be astonished. I've had many friends and people I've introduced to DMT and had them look at things, and their I included a short clip of this in my original video of just looking at a picture of the galaxy. I've seen people's jaws hit the floor over what this thing is doing, and they all report the same thing. The galaxy itself will start to spin and rotate and pulse and glow. This is not just like normal it's not the same as looking at on, say, like a recreational dose of mushrooms or something. It has this kind of objectness. It has depth to it. It will sort of detach from the picture, and it's not flowing, or it's not muddy. It's not like kind of mushy or flowing over. It's very precise, ultra high definition, and people's jaw hits the floor. So this, again, this is why what you're describing it doesn't seem at all remarkable to me. It seems it's a very common effect, and this is why people like looking at psychedelic art, when things happen within the context of what happens, and it does have that objectness. It can have very intimate layers to the objectness. I've seen people have, start to have boundaries dissolve between them and the objective thing, where they can become the thing itself. So all these kind of, these effects are I mean, all these things, I'm not saying, and this was another thing that kind of popped up in the comments, and maybe this is a kind of a fault in the sort of the language that I use, but I'm not denying at all that something, amazing and meaneful and profound is happening. I'm not just saying, oh, it's just, it's just drugs.
No, I didn't get that from that at all. I thought you were...
I know, but I've seen some people who have sort of commented on just kind of dismissing it. I think these are something incredible, but again, I just to pin it down to something that's happening just purely because of this laser, I don't think stacks up at all. So this is kind of really what I'm hinging this on. I'm not, I don't think we would disagree at all, Dan, in terms of bigger conversation needs to happen. What does this mean? What does this mean in terms of consciousness? What does this mean in terms of like what is reality? I think those are conversations that you and I could have probably for hours, completely detached from this laser thing. But I just kind of, again, I just feel kind of want to sort of like pinned down. It like is that the kind of the hill you want to you're willing to die, that the laser is kind of doing this? Because I don't think it is at all.
Yeah.
And all the examples you give seem to only sort of reinforce my own.
Yeah. So none of this is, I'm in full awareness that being on the receiving end of what I'm saying without seeing it first, there's literally, I tried for years now. Until people don't see it, there's nothing I can say to you that will convince you that it's different than everything you just described because of everything that you said. One second. And I'm with full agreement with you, because I know, having so much experience with the substance before as well, I would have the exact same response as you. And there's simply nothing I can say to you aside from, please go try it properly, and then let's have this discussion again in a way that I want you to reflect back on what you think is different. But it is absolutely different in how it actually appears, even with what you see with the Galaxy and with the phone and all of that stuff. The other thing I would like to point out is
how would you know that?
Because I've seen it now over 300 times.
But how would you know it's different to my experience with the poster or with the painting?
People who have a lot of experience just like us, and they all of a sudden see something that they've never seen before. So now that's one of them. The other thing I would like to say, and this is the reason that I'm not really that emotionally attached to it, is because I'm not coming here to say, hey guys, please listen to my discovery. It's very clear to me, which I don't know if we're going to have enough time today. We can do another talk about it if you would like. I'm going to release soon a video talking about that. There are other things that start happening since I built the laser that seem to be of a completely different kind of thing, that after speaking to, I don't know, hundreds at this point, experienced psychonauts online, nobody seems to exactly know what I'm talking about, but I'm experiencing this very coherently. And this is not to say I'm special. It's to say that I know this is happening, even if you want to say it's in my head, it's just way too coherent. But the reason I'm not attached to it emotionally, to this whole thing, is because it's not about me and me discovering it. It's about the fact that I'm not asking anybody to just adopt it. For me, I am over the hump. So now I've seen enough to know that this is actually happening. So I know it's just a matter of time before there's going to be more and more and more things pop up for other people as well. And eventually through mainstream science, it will arrive at this point of the same understanding. So to me, it's pretty clear. So I'm not so much trying to push and force it, but to make it available so people can go and verify for themselves. And then we can come back and talk about it. And in the beginning, I had this there was always this very emotional thing for me, because it is, after all, I'm claiming this big thing. And I'm a person who is very allergic to all things woo-woo. And so realizing that I am now on the woo-woo side for other people, and they now have to go and look at the thing until they didn't see it, I had this kind of thing in my chest. And I was like, it's hard, because until they don't see it, I'm just a guy saying these things. But now over, I don't know how many hundreds of times, where I have people, go through this, and they're either skeptical or they're interested, but, they say, okay, cool. And then the moment they see it, there's a different twinkle in their eye. There's something that happens to them. They go, wait, what? What is that? And this is people that have done, hundreds of times smoked DMT. And this is, I have a compilation of videos of certain people that allow me to share, of people doing this. And I understand that something is different there. So now, to tell you that I have a way to describe it with words, what is different between the rotating galaxy and the specific letters, and the moment, there's nothing I can say. It's based on a quality of experience that you must have for yourself. But I claim that after you have it, you will start to understand what I mean by, it has a different kind of rigidity, which is a difficult thing to say in terms of DMT, because everything is astonishing. I agree with you. But this is maybe more astonishing, but not because it's crazier. It's the other way around. It's because of how mundane it is. So you all of a sudden have this field of craziness going on in front of you, beautiful craziness. And where the laser is, everything collapses, and there's just this digital clock, and it's super coherent. I don't know, you probably don't want me to tell you too much in case you actually want to try this for yourself, so you can, because I can email you later, and you don't look at the email, look at it only after you saw it, and then you'll see how many correlations there are to what I'm actually telling you. But yeah, that's the best I can do with words. I think that the real discussion, and this is not evading the subject, but this is the truth. the larger discussion is that, does the laser allow us to triangulate something objective versus having all of these correlations that seems to be subjective, but some people say, no, we think it's objective because we've seen the same being or something like that. This is something that, as you know, they focused on in the first round in the Imperial College in London. And it's a noble attempt, and I'm super happy that the people who are involved. Very smart people, very dedicated. But if you ask me to go and ask around if we saw the same being, if the space is real, it's kind of the same way like dropping two people from another planet in New York City and asking a couple of random folks something about the physics of that space. It's not going to get you very far, because we can establish that maybe some beings look the same or feel the same. But you're getting into very deep waters of what you said in the first time we tried to talk, which is like, it's the archetypes, right? You can say that there's certain underpinnings of the brain that are very similar. And because of that, these things appear very similar. What I'm saying is that the code seemed to be so coherent and stable. It never changes in essence. It never moves, and it never nudges towards nothing else but what it actually is, that I'm claiming it gives you a tool to at least potentially play with asking, okay, if this is a real space and what we're seeing is real, what do we need to do through our understanding of our physical world to establish that in full? For example, if you do certain perturbations, physical perturbations around it, which is a set of experiments that I'm developing now with a physicist, let's say rotating magnetic fields or projecting it through bismuth or some other substance, whatever it might be, right? And then you really set it up as like an actual laboratory condition. And then you have multiple people view this thing under the same conditions. And let's say I rotate magnetic fields this way with this frequency around exactly this point. If something changes in the code and I ask people what changed, and then they report, and you have 200 people report the same thing, okay, you have something. Even if you want to say that it's something about the brain, you still have something. Because if you didn't tell anybody something and it happened exactly the same way when a physical phenomena was present, then you actually have something. And that's the potential that I'm claiming that the laser allows you to do versus any other thing, which you have so many degrees of freedom there, like beings, for example, because it rests on...
Well, can I just, maybe I'll throw in a different example here. Are you familiar with kind of like traditional, say, Shipibo shamanism, or the kind of like Peruvian shamanism? Mm-hmm. So they have, it's very common for within these ayahuasca ceremonies for people to report these very Shipibo, these very iconic Shipibo kind of tapestries, which will end up kind of pouring out the ceiling and sort of completely overtaking the visionary space. Now that actually does get recorded. The vision that is being seen is the Icaro that is being sung, and the Icaro that is being sung, the shamans record these in the actual tapestry itself. And they weave these tapestries, and you can, I've got some hanging on my bedroom wall in the other room. They're not just pretty patterns; they are the spoken word. The song equals the vision. The vision can be captured in language. It's so when and I've got a video of this somewhere on Instagram of a Shipibo shaman sitting there, and someone's looking to buy one of these tapestries. And she says, "Oh, I'll sing it for you." And she reads it as a piece of music and sings it as she's tracing the lines. The lines are equal sort of Western sheet music. So again, this kind of points to this thing that these things are sort of capturable. That these phenomena do occur with outside of a laser. That things can be stimulated. That again have this very this objective quality that you talk about, because it is something that is heard, that becomes experienced as a vision. The vision itself has deep emotional, psychological meaning. People get healed during these ceremonies. It changes the way they view themselves. It might change, they might stop feeling physical pain. It has just an extraordinary spectrum of effects. And again, this is all kind of well documented within sort of psychedelia.
And
so
I would say it points to exactly what I'm saying. It's just that in the West, we insist on interpreting it in a different way.
I think I don't know if we. So what is the way that you think that we're interpreting it?
So if we're saying that it's not enough to establish that there's something objective going on, in other words, there's the physical world and then there's our mind separate from it, I'm saying that points to that not being the case. But in the West, we're so entrenched in this vision that we insist that, no, this must be explained in terms of the physical world is interacting somehow with our mind, and that's what we're seeing.
I'd say that we were entrenched, but that, again, this is kind of changing as part of the ongoing, new research into psychedelics, because now there's all these trials going on of particularly focused on things like on people like military veterans, whereby it is now being more understood that the psychological is impacting the physical, that people are feeling physical pain, and their lives, their very objective lives, are being severely disrupted by psychological, subjective experiences. So I would agree that was sort of Western, the Western mindset was very overly dry, overly reductionist at one point. It's gone through phases of being very highly spiritual. You could trace it back to things where like the Catholic Church was the main thing. So it's gone in cycles. But I would certainly say that up until like the 80s, it was certainly that kind of mindset. But it's changing, and as it changes, I think it's best. I think the better approach is to really just look at these things as a kind of full, like I say, as the full spectrum, as accepted within the experience. But if we focus on these kind of, what I would say, like kind of novel, gimmicky type things, I think the kind of the laser thing, it does invoke a certain kind of magical thinking. It's saying that something only happens here because of this, and lasers, dimension.
I'm a little surprised by you saying that. I'm not sure. Like, I don't remember ever myself saying that. So this is never the emphasis that only under these conditions you see this. Because I'm sure if it's real, then there's always very numerous ways to arriving at the same point of understanding. Otherwise, you can't triangulate it.
Okay, well, let's go. Let me just try and pin this down. So we are agreeing then that the effect is not unique to the laser.
So far, from what I'm seeing, you cannot achieve this level of resolution without the laser. For example, people email me all the time that sometimes they see a certain kind of code when they either wake up or they're in a different altered state, even with things like MDA or MDMA, or just under transcendental meditation or things like that. And I do see, for example, the code, if I smoke DMT or on a certain amount of mushrooms, I also see certain kind of language or code kind of running in surfaces, subsumed. But when you project the laser, that's why I keep pointing to the resolution of it. It seems to have it's different enough to be a different thing. So, for example, the language that you see without the laser, it has a little bit more malleable quality. You can kind of change it with your attention to something else. It's a little ephemeral. But when you look with the laser, the rigidity just jumps up to a completely different level, and it doesn't seem to be malleable. It's just.
Would you say that's due to the? I mean, lasers are fairly specific pattern creating devices. Mm-hmm. So I think an example or an analogy here would be that if you had a black screen and you projected a white square onto it, and then take enough psychedelics, then that square will become a cube, and then the cube may become a sort of tesseract and begin sort of transforming within itself, and it will have a special level of fidelity to it because it is a fairly simple, very high contrast pattern of black screen, white square. And then this sooner or later, this object will begin to sort of float off the screen, float into a hyperspace, begin to take on, you can have relationships with the object and begin to sort of, identify with the object. So you can have that same, I think the level of fidelity you're talking about, I think is,
just flip the process you just described.
Okay.
And that's what I mean.
Flip the process I just described. So I'm not sure what project a black screen onto a white.
Go from the blobbiest to the most concrete, and the laser would lay on the spectrum in the most concrete.
But what I've just described would also be the most concrete, because we're talking about a very specific, extremely contrasted.
You're saying with your attention you can just break it down completely. That's what you're saying.
I'm not saying either with your attention or without. I'm just saying that under the effects of psychedelics, whether it's something that's you're intentionally focusing your attention on, that you can have, a very simple pattern, which again is more or less what the laser is a simple pattern, can be expressed as a fourth dimensional object, complete with its own objectness. And if that could be because of the nature of psychedelics, the presentation.
But that's
just bear with me 1 second, Dan. Just because of the nature of psychedelics, that object could then be presented alongside an awakening experience, which is a lot of what you described sounds like someone having a eureka, like aha, like this is a true. I think there's a difference between having a psychedelic experience and having one of these kind of very awakening experiences, and I wouldn't deny that you could have that be forced upon you by the presence of a certain set of circumstances. In this case, the pattern that the laser is generating, or the vision of Christ in a piece of toast. I don't think it kind of matters what the thing is that stimulates it. You can find profound meaning within a otherwise fairly mundane object, and it can be completely consciousness rewiring. So again, like I would say that the effect that it's having on the individual, again, I'm not dismissing at all. I just don't think it's specific to the laser. And again, like I said, people see Jesus in cats' assholes.
Yeah, I'm saying, but it's not. It doesn't belong in the same realm of experiences.
No, but not from the visionary side of things, but from the awakening side of things.
Right. But that's a much deeper conversation about human conviction and meaning and consciousness. So I guess what I want to take you I want to ask you, what do you mean by because of the nature of psychedelics? What is that nature?
Well, I think that nature is something that I am in no way, or I think nobody on the planet is really yet qualified to make a statement on. But
that's my point.
It is the altering of the human experience. That is what it is, an altered state. It is the nature of entering an altered state where things that were not possible are possible within that subjective experience. Now, whether that experience is tethered to this piece of meat, or whether it's part of some sort of consciousness field in the same way that gravity exists, or whether it's part of some sort of alien, TV station that's been it, fuck knows. I'm completely open to any of that, but I don't think that's the stuff where we kind of we can speculate, we can have sort of fun talking about it. I think it's important to sort of talk about it, and it certainly, I think even just the act of talking about it stimulates a human consciousness in amazing ways, which is good. But I wouldn't sort of go and put my hat on any one of these things and say I know that's what it is, and I know that's what it is because I did this with either the picture on my wall or the laser or the Icaros or whatever. I think that seems to take a little bit of the I don't know. It seems just too certain, and I don't think that's a place you can rationally come from.
That's fair, but that's again. I will always bring you that back to the point that this is for me the stimulation of a conversation that needs to happen. I am still convinced of what I'm saying, but I am not. It's not that I have a lot of resting on convincing you. I am saying, look, here's the information. I'm convinced, and I can tell you why. It's not that I don't have like.
But I'm not sure what it is we're talking about being convinced of, because it seems.
It seems about committed.
I'm not. When you're talking about being convinced of something, I'm not sure even. I think it's almost like we're talking about two different things.
It sounds like your impression is that I think that the laser is somehow a magical moment that allows for this thing to happen, versus it just points to something real in reality. And I'm saying we have enough to know that this is actually real, and we're not allowing ourselves to trust some of our intuitions, and we're asking the wrong questions. So, for example, to ask if the brain can produce this potentially is not a good question, because it's too blunt. Why? Because the brain is too incomplete, which means that technically it can simulate anything if you're given enough time and energy. So it's infinite.
Can you just clarify what would you mean by incomplete? Sorry.
It's Turing complete. It's a computational system that is Turing complete, which means...
Turing
complete. Which means that it can simulate anything in existence that is physically possible.
Sure.
So the reason it makes the question infinitely elastic, because the answer to if the brain can produce this particular thing is always yes. And so the question has to be of a different flavor. Can we set up conditions? Can we set some kind of an experiment that will, maybe not conclusively, but conclusively enough, give us enough information of whether this thing is only manifested in all of our minds, or is it a thing that responds to something that we call physical? So you're basically creating you need to create a demarcation line, which I'm not 100% sure how to do. But this is something where we have to do it, because at this point I would say we have enough information. I would also claim that it's not a coincidence that it happens now, but that's already a much more, tinfoil hatty conversation.
Do you not think maybe this is, by doing this though, that kind of plays into the kind of the hands of the kind of the Western scientific zeitgeist that you seem to have opposed to, because I think you're trying to lodge.
I'm not opposing it at all. I think there has to be balance between perceptions. That's all I'm saying.
But it seems like you're trying to tether the transcendent experience to the physical experience, and again, I would sort of question whether that's actually there's any purpose in that. Just like I would not try and tether my emotional experience to, like I said at the beginning, no one's going to. It would be useless for someone to try and measure my love for somebody else. It's pointless. So when we get into the
just so I understand what you're saying, are you framing the laser observation as the transcendent experience?
I'm framing your sort of. You seem to be wanting. Let me try and sort of backtrack just to sort of make sure that we. So, what I'm trying to point to is that the laser itself is not causing you a unique effect, and you seem to be more or less agreeing with that.
I'm certain of that. Yeah. No, I'm certain that it's not a unique effect. I am certain that what you see in the laser is not. It points to the fact that there's layers that you see in the psychedelics.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Just more objective. Yeah.
Yeah. So the laser itself is not a unique effect, but it is very. I think what you're saying is that the laser is very good at highlighting, at really drawing attention to something that is going on, which is we're kind of getting into like sort of metaphysics now, and sort of like, hey, that there's. Objective reality is not what we think. There's more layers here.
Yes.
And look, here's a very surefire way of having that kind of awakening.
Yes.
And I wouldn't necessarily dispute that, but again, I would say that the same kind of effect could be had by, any other sort of the various routes through psychedelia.
The only way is for you to try and tell me if you think it's correct. That's the only way, because there's nothing I can say with words that will convince you that it might be different, because you're so experienced in that space. And that's the only thing I can encourage you to do, and I do encourage you to do, and I'm willing to send you a laser, no charge, so you can the proper one, and you can actually try it.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I like to think I am a psychonaut, I'm an explorer like yourself. So by all means, Dan, if you're willing to send me that, I would be more than happy to approach it with an absolute open mind. Like I say, I'm not trying to shit on what you're doing, or just try and be.
Yeah.
That's good, mate. Because I am genuine with that. So I would be absolutely happy to try it out and give my honest opinion on it on the channel. Okay, so let's. I think let's try and move past the laser. I have got a couple more minutes if you do, Dan, because
I do. I'm trying to be respectful of your time, but I cleared I have another 30 minutes, so we can definitely.
Okay,
that's as you have. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So if we can sort of agree that let me put it this way: that the laser is one way of many ways to access this kind of additional understanding or this kind of additional realization about the nature of realities. Would that be a fair statement? Or
at the moment, I'm not aware of any other way to make it that concrete.
Okay, so you think that people who
I'm saying at the moment, I'm not aware of any other way to make it that concrete.
But that would then suggest then that there's, out of all the people who've ever done psychedelics, only yourself and your kind of like laser entourage are the ones who have seen, because the kind of realizations that you're talking about, this is not uncommon. I mean, you're not. There are other people.
You might have similar realizations, but the observation itself is of a unique flavor that I am claiming so far, with everything that I understand about the world, seems to point to a new way of probing it. Yes. And you wouldn't make the same kind of like analogy that by saying that being in the middle of the jungle in an ayahuasca ceremony and having shamans sing at you and experience that is also similarly a unique experience,
Because I mean, I've done my fair share of psychedelics over the last 30 years, and I certainly don't get that experience sat in my bedroom that I get sat in the middle of a jungle, and I've done that enough times, you know.
So it's. I think we're saying the same thing. It's level of conviction because of the level of the repeatability and rigidity of the experience. I'm saying the laser sits somewhere up here. I can't know for sure if all humans ever existed if they never had the same kind of, you know, and I'm sure they had. But this is just a little bit more democratic. Like it is just like consistent enough to say that this is, you know. And I guess not to butt into your question, but this is a small point I do want to make. I'm sure that you're familiar with the allegory that comes from Buddhist Zen with the snake and the rope, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, for the audience, there's, you know, you sit in a room, you think there's a snake, you have an emotional reaction. Oh my God, a snake. And then you're like, wait a second. Then you come closer. The way that the shade, you think it's a rope now, the way the shade hits the rope, whatever. So you go back and forth. You're like, oh, it's a rope. It's okay. And then you relax inside. And then you're like, no, it's a snake. No, it's a rope. Okay. So you go back and forth. There is a moment where if you get close enough to the object, from which there's no more return. So in Buddhism, they use this analogy to outline the fact that there's the seeking of the self. There's this point to the process of the seeking of the self that is like being convinced that it's a rope. From that point on, you can never go back to seeing that it's a snake because you have enough information, because you're close enough, there's enough of the thing, you see that it's a rope. In the same sense, in Buddhist Zen, they talk about the fact that there is a moment where you can be convinced, absolutely convinced, that there's no self because that's the truth. So in the same way, I would tell you that that code has that this is a rope moment. Like you just know what it is and there's no question about it. Now, I'm not saying you know what it is in the sense of like, you know what the ultimate thing of it is. Of course not. We're just in the beginning of playing with this thing. But you know that something is really there. And that's my claim.
Yeah. And I would kind of just follow. I think, you know, the reason that these codes, languages, scripts, whatever we call them, are sort of meaningful. The reason why I think people like Alison Gray it does try and capture it is because, yeah, I would completely agree that this is a meaningful. It's the presence of the code itself is not a sort of, or the language or whatever we want to call it, mystical language, secret language, and blah blah blah. That is not a kind of gimmick, and it does sort of lead to these kind of questions of, you know, very sort of broad questions, almost unwordable questions, because it strikes at something very sort of deep within us, or this kind of inner mystery. But again, I like I say, I just don't think that is necessarily hinged upon the laser. But it sounds like we're agreeing that it's not, that we're just really talking a question of fidelity or.
I think the columnated light, like from technical terms, I think the columnated light allows, so it doesn't work with regular light, for example. And it doesn't work without the diffraction. So it tells us a lot about, well, not a lot, but it tells us quite a bit about like what needs to happen and why, which, by the way, we can actually utilize to try and now sift through what we know about physics and why this might happen. I would say my, working assumption is that the fact that it's a laser and not regular light allows for this kind of resolution.
Totally agree. Yeah. I would 100%. I think that is exactly why it happens with the sort of laser, and that's why I also used the example earlier of, a black screen with a white square projector. I think you need that distinct juxtaposition of contrast in order for something to be able to happen. So if it was mushy, like you say, if it was just a torch put against the wall, it wouldn't work. You would get a sort of, it's not going to have that kind of precision which something like a very well-rendered high-definition image would do. So I think we're more or less on the same page there. I have got a couple of questions down, and they are a little bit cheeky. So I hope you can take them in sort of good spirits. But
thanks for the heads up.
No, because I don't want you to think I think we're more on the same page than we're on different pages. One thing I do want to just float to you. I was discussing this with a couple of peers in a Discord server, and one sort of person who was actually, this is a person who is a professional psychedelic researcher, and they sort of floated that what's possibly going on here was, and I don't know if this is a well-known term, but McKenna syndrome. So as you might be aware, Terence McKenna in his later sort of years, he focused intensely on this time wave zero theory.
Right.
Yeah, and he sort of threw himself into it, had all this same sort of convictions and stuff there. And then after many years and again, putting the same efforts into it, came to realization, actually, this is just completely delusional. And also in the process, maybe that it kind of stretched his own sort of, boundaries a little bit too much and sort of broke his own sort of ethics of what he was, of how much he wanted this to work. I just wanted to kind of float that. Have you considered that this might be something that's going on with yourself? Because you did make some allusions earlier to that, it did sort of make you, there was a lot of doubt about it at the beginning. So, is this something that you would entertain as a possibility, that it's, although that there is something there and that they're in the same kind of lofty ideas that there are around time wave zero, which again is a fascinating theory, but I think most people would agree it's complete bullshit. But that doesn't take anything away from the fascinating and the kind of the ability for it to stimulate conversations around it. So yeah, like I say, it is a little bit of a cheeky question, but do you think, is there any sort of parallels there, or is that something you considered?
Well, okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing I would say about time wave zero is that there was a lot of fudging going on there. You probably know things about the detail, right? So the way he works with mathematician originally arrived at a different date, and then he conveniently realigned it with December 21st, 2021. And there's a lot of other things like that. And the element of confabulation is a very big one. It's very easy to drift away from what you really are experiencing into this delusions of grandeur and all of that stuff. So in the grand scheme of things, can I know that this is not some kind of a trick that the universe is playing on me and on us? Of course not. I can't possibly know that. I do know one thing. So there's, again, if you would like, this will be lovely. Either after you try it or in some other time, we can also have another discussion about what I'm claiming to now also see on a regular basis, which is like all these added components on DMT that were not present before, that appear 100% of the time for me. And they're very real in the sense of like, objectness and all of these things.
Sure.
And combined with the fact that I'm not, my focus, like I already told you in this conversation, is not to say, guys, this is it, we got to drop everything and do this thing. My only emphasis, so I have my conviction because of my reasons that we can talk about deeper, but my actual, I guess I see it as contribution, is to shake enough smart people to say, hey guys, seriously, there's something here, you should look. But you should look with a little bit more scrupulous eyes. Like you should actually look at it a little bit closer. Sorry, not scrupulous. So you should be able to allow yourself to venture into a slightly more fluid territory of what you think it might be, because I think it will land you in a much more concrete place. And that's really the mission that I'm on. Terrence put a lot of stock into this. I have a lot of other things going on. This is not, the thing that animates my life. I'm much more focused on trying to figure out how to help people in different ways through, deep understanding of themselves and the world and all that stuff. So that's where the most of my interest really. But I do see that there's something real there. So wherever it's going to take us together collectively, what I said in my videos, I mean that. This is something that will be arrived at by all of us together. This conversation is a perfect example of this. It's important that people push back. I welcome this with open arms, because then you really get lost in the weeds. So I am working with a physicist and I am working with a cognitive scientist who do, I bounce these ideas off of them and they ask, okay, how crazy are we getting into here? Or, that kind of stuff. So in that sense, I see less of that danger, because I'm allowing the new data to inform me all the time. But at least in the moment, I do insist that we should look closer. And I do think that we will have an additional breakthrough within the next less than a year, because I do think that there's a thing there that seems, I don't want to talk about it like in
Sure.
in vague terms, but I do think there's going to be another layer here to additionally. And if it turns out that we come up with like a perfectly good understanding that captures all of the things that I'm at the moment aware of, and it still frames them in the regular physicalist perspective, great. I have no problem with that.
Well, I don't think my concern is, and I've certainly been accused of this a few times. I'm not saying that you're accusing me of it, but I'm saying people often do, just because I do sort of challenge back on some of these things. I don't think the desirable end goal is to try and bring this back to a physical. I don't consider myself to be like I can wax lyrical about the transcendent as much as anyone, but I do think it's kind of useful to frame that within a somewhat sort of, I would just say a grounded sort of mindset. So I'm not trying to bring this back into just like a purely physical, materialist, reductionist, whatever sort of, is we want to put on it.
Correct.
So yeah, and in that regard, I'm sort of kind of there with you. Like I think it's to have the sort of the bigger discussions, I think is absolutely where we should go. And again, this is why I think that tethering it to the physical laser thing rather than the sort of the bigger mindset. And unfortunately, I'm not saying this is any fault of your own, Dan, but from a lot of the comments and stuff that I've read and messages that I've had from people who are kind of in support of this, they are sort of talking more about like dimension ripping lasers going on. So I think it's
hyperbole is very common, especially in the psychedelic space. But it's the conversation is. Yeah, go ahead.
But suggestibility is also very, very common, and I think that's I think we both know that there's a lot of people who will follow what I would say are kind of like very sort of strange ideas. You can end up with sort of guru, very strange guru cults forming and all sort of weird ideas. So I think this is it's more the reason to try and sort of ground it of whatever it is we're trying to have the conversation around, to try and ground it in the most sort of practical and sort of easily communicatable language, rather than sort of focusing on sort of quantum mysticism or sort of, because I mean, one thing that kind of occurred to me, and again, this is slightly cheeky, so I hope we don't take it to it, but when I was looking at this, I was kind of envisioning 50 years into the future, and I was thinking like, are we seeing the birth of the Church of Psychedelic Lasers, where the covenant is the sacrament is the laser, and the object of worship is the code, and it's all hail the sacred code, it's all hail the laser, and I was thinking, oh Jesus. And when we see the nature of some of these cults, there could be a picture of Saint Dan on the wall, and of course, like I say, I think you're very genuine. I think you're very enthusiastic. I really do admire your curiosity, but I do also think it's important to try and stop some of this kind of craziness appearing, if possible. And this is one of the reasons in a previous conversation that kind of went awry due to technical problems, I do mention like there are people sort of referring to you as the world-renowned DMT scientist, and
it was the greatest. Funny. It was one title in a podcast, and it was a comedy podcast.
It's actually not, mate. It's actually. But it's actually in a lot of his pretty much all the videos of which that particular person is talking to you will carry some grandiose title of the world's most renowned DMT specialist, the world's DMT expert, the DMT scientist.
Can I ask you a question though? Did you watch any of these through?
Yeah.
Did I come across as that?
I don't think you came across as that, but I do think there was some language that you're using which I think cast some false, or I would say, I don't know whether it was, I don't want to sort of say that it was necessarily intentional, but it came across as a kind of false comparison. So there was conversations. Yeah, sure. There was a conversation where you were talking about your experiences, with the laser, and you immediately went from that topic and moved into, you were talking that you started talking about extended state DMT. You immediately went from there to talk about how you just been on the phone to Chris Zimmerman. You immediately went from that to say, and as you do, Dan, and I think it's you link your ideas almost seamlessly, and conversational topics almost seamlessly. But those conversational topics are sometimes completely unrelated, which is why I think it's important to slice up into chunks, because the overall impression, which I had, well, so the overall impression that comes across from taking a snippet of one of these conversations is that it sounded like you were saying that that Chris Timmerman has signed off on this, and that this is now being included in the DMT X trials, and that's not the case. Wait, but it's the impression that's given. And
are you saying that I said that?
I'm not saying that you directly said that. I'm saying that the way that you strung those topics together.
I see. So you're saying that I'm mentioning it right after, so it seems like I'm saying that I got the green light from people like Chris Timmerman.
I'm saying that, there is... The way that you speak across these topics, there is no pause in between that you actually change. It's sentence after sentence. I mean, if it's okay, Bill, I can include one of the clips to sort of demonstrate what I'm talking about.
No, I'm not. First of all, you're free, of course, to do what you will. I am not. I'm just trying to, like I said, it's a fair reflection back, and it's very important for me to actually come across as rigorous as I possibly can because of the nature of the ground that I'm treading.
And it's this kind of you do speak with this kind of stream of consciousness kind of thing, and that's I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all, Dan. I think it can lead to some really fascinating conversations, but when I think it can also be quite a sort of a bit of a Gish Gallop sort of tactic when you're talking about something which is an objective claim or something which is your kind of like personal understanding of something, and then you start immediately stringing in, and this researcher said this, and I did this, and I've been on the at that point I think it's worth parsing out what your sort of claim is and what your thing is, and then making it clear that this is topic 2, because I mean maybe this might be part of the fun of talking to somebody like that podcast host. They were just coming along for the ride, and it was all sort of I think just seen as one sort of topic, and I think I think I've seen that reflected.
I understand your point very clearly, and again I respect and even appreciate this reflection. I will even go as far as to say, from what I know, the last I've heard of it, I think Chris tried it and he didn't see it right away. This is a thing that you and I can talk about later in detail, so you can so it's easier for you to see it quicker. There's this thing that I am mentioning in my videos, which I'm not sure why that is, and certain people takes them a little longer to see it. The good news is that it's a one-way street. So the second that your brain understands where to find it, it's just you can't unsee it anymore. And so I would go as far as to say, just to clarify, if there was about that particular thing, that as far as I know so far, Chris didn't see it. But about the specifics that what you're reflecting back to me, something to take into account, because I definitely don't intend it to sound like that, but I also want to make sure that I actually want to steer away from connecting my ideas to riding on somebody else's reputation if I know that person did not sign off on what I'm saying. So that, regardless, that's a good thing that you tell me that it sounds like that to you.
Yeah, and also I think I am, like I say, genuine that I think you're a very interesting person. You've got a lot of ideas to say, and so I think I would just encourage you, just as a person friend, just to steer away from the kind of crank language. And I'm not, I think it creates, it does put you into the kind of quantum mysticism woo-woo camp. And I think from our conversations, I don't think you are that. And so I think you're kind of doing yourself a discredit by, I'll just put it this way. If that was me, I would get onto somebody and say, "Guy, dude, change the title of your video. You're making me look like a dickhead." Because
I appreciate what you're saying, but I really don't see it that way. I think if you put it together, it's a comedy channel. There's no this is, if you watch me talk for 3 minutes, you understand that that's not how I perceive myself. Also, like I told you, and this is very genuine what I'm saying right now, I'm not putting a lot of stock in me being this guy who found this thing. I'm saying I'm really interested in us coming at it together and talking about it. So if it's real, we can actually cash it out in a way that it's supposed to be cashed out, because the claim is huge. It's insane. If what I'm saying is true, this really will, like suggested in my title, will change everything. And it's not that I'm saying I'm the first person to ever enter this space and postulate this. Far from it. We have geniuses on this planet who are dealing with this, like Gallimore and like Chris Timmerman, right? So the very serious people are addressing this. I'm definitely not the most renowned DMT scientist, right? So I think that with all of that considered, like, I don't know, I kind of trust the audience to make these distinctions. But also in addition,
I think you're having way too much confidence in YouTube audiences, mate. I think.
But also, again, really, you know, I know where I'm coming from. So I know my karma and conscience is very clean. I know where I'm coming from. I'm coming for us. I'm really, really, one of my biggest drivers is the coming together of humanity. And as trite as it sounds, you know, I understand it's cheesy, but I really think that that's the way forward. If we are going to the stars, we can't bring all this like conniving nonsense and personal stuff like with us. It's just going to tear us apart. I know this is a very off topic for this conversation, but I really think that's the truth. And I know I'm coming from that place. It doesn't mean that I always succeed. Like you just reflected back to me.
Okay, so it's interesting that we're talking about like sort of repeatable effects and stuff like that, because I think what is a repeatable effect is that me and Danny are doomed to have constant technical problems whenever we try and talk. And I think maybe this is the kind of the universe kind of wanting us to have this conversation in bite-sized chunks. So I think I've really enjoyed this conversation, Dan. And like I say, if you can, you know, fit me up with one of these lasers, I'll be happy to try it. And yeah, mate, I'll let you have it. If there's anything you want to sort of close with or point anyone towards your work, I'll certainly put links in the description below to your original video, to your channel. And if there's anything else you want me to point towards, then I mean, yeah, just feel free to state now.
Thank you, Rob. So I also had a great time having this conversation. Like you said, I have a YouTube channel called Then Go Thoughts, 3 words. Danny Goler across all social medias. Actually, I think it's Goler Danny in Twitter, but I barely use it, so it doesn't really matter. I guess closing words is the riff that I was on, and I just want to close that point, which is that I'm coming at this from the perspective that we are on the verge of a huge discovery, not just from what I'm doing, but from all aspects. I will point you to the work that I posted on Twitter by Melvin Vopson. He's a physicist who just claims to have found a new law of physics that has to do with informational systems, in which the second law of infodynamics, which seems to be going exactly the opposite of the second law of thermodynamics. And he proves it in, you know, biological systems and physical systems and in computational systems, and even proves that actually the evolution doesn't happen randomly, but follows that law. So that is to the effect of there's going to be a lot of new things that are about to start showing up. That's my claim. That will start pointing to the fact that we live in a computational environment, which will also allow us to play with new ways, new technologies, even physical technologies. Nobody's under no obligation to take my word for it, but my aim is to stimulate this conversation, and I do think we have something of substance here, and I want this to be an open, honest, and respectful discussion that we continue to have collectively as a collective consciousness. And on a personal note, I actually never found anything you did even slightly cheeky, to be honest. You're extremely respectful, and I think we align on basically everything. And I actually think that unless I would be on this end of like the figuring out the laser, I would have the exact same response as you do to what I do. So in that sense, we have nothing but respect between you and I. So that's it.
Perfect. Well, thanks a lot, Dan. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, if you're up for it, let's have a conversation in another time. Once I've tried this laser, and maybe once the internet gods are smiling on us with better connections. But thanks a lot for your time. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Dan.
Thank you, Rob. Same here.